The transport hit the atmosphere at the wrong angle, and Kira Vasek knew they were dead before the first hull plate tore free. She was out of her crash harness and into the aisle while the fuselage was still screaming, pulling herself hand over hand along the overhead rail toward the aft compartment where 26 Reichkai refugees were strapped into seats designed for a species half their size. The harness webbing cut into their dense silver-brown fur. Their long, tapered ears were pressed flat against their skulls. Their eyes wide, amber, built for the dim forests of a world 300 light-years from here, were locked on her with the particular terror of a people who had already lost everything once, and were now losing the last thing they had left. The transport they had counted on. "Heads between your knees," Kira shouted over the shrieking metal. "Arms over your heads. Do not release your harnesses." She did not know if they understood the words. The Reichkai spoke a fluid, musical language that the translation implants could handle in calm conditions, but the implants were struggling against the noise, the vibration, the electromagnetic interference from a hull that was ionizing against an atmosphere it had never been designed to enter. What came through the implant was fragments, broken syllables. The Reichkai word for please, repeated over and over by a female in the third row who was curled around a juvenile pressed against her chest. Kira grabbed the emergency kit from the bulkhead mount and braced. The impact came in 3 stages. The first was the forest canopy, something dense and fibrous that shredded across the belly of the transport like 1,000 hands grabbing at once. The second was the ground, which was not flat. The transport hit a ridge of volcanic rock at a 30-degree angle, and the entire forward section folded like wet cardboard, compressing 6 meters of cockpit and crew compartment into 2 meters of crushed alloy. The pilots were gone. The navigator was gone. Corporal Sato, who had been standing in the forward hatch checking the approach vector, was gone. The third stage was the slide. The transport's belly caught a frozen river of black volcanic glass, and the wreck sledded downhill for what felt like a full minute, spinning slowly, shedding pieces of itself. A wing, a thruster nacelle, a section of cargo bay that separated cleanly and tumbled away into the tree line with a sound like a building falling. Then it stopped. Silence. Not silence the tick of cooling metal, the hiss of atmosphere bleeding through a dozen breaches, the low keening of the Reichkai, and somewhere far away, a sound like wind passing through something hollow and vast. But after the violence of the crash, it felt like silence. Kira opened her eyes. She was on the ceiling. The transport had come to rest inverted, and she was lying on the overhead panels with the emergency kit clutched against her chest and blood running from a cut above her left eyebrow. She wiped it away, checked her limbs, nothing broken, nothing numb, and rolled onto her stomach. "Sound off," she said. "Anyone who can hear me, call out." The Reichkai responded, not with words she could parse through the struggling implant, but with sounds, low, rumbling calls from deep in their barrel chests, the kind of sound a species makes when it is confirming that it is still alive. She counted the calls. 19. She counted again. 19. 26 had been aboard. The pilots and Sato were gone. That left 23 passengers and crew, minus herself. 22. 19 responding. 3 silent. Kira found them in the wreckage. One was Reichkai, an elder male whose harness had failed, who had been thrown against the port bulkhead hard enough to crack the panel. He was dead. She checked for a pulse at the base of his wide, flat jaw, found nothing, and moved on because there were 19 who were not dead, and the transport was filling with something that smelled like sulfur and burnt copper. The second was Lieutenant Price, the medical officer. He was alive but unconscious, pinned under a section of cargo netting and structural frame. His left leg was broken below the knee compound, the bone visible through a tear in his duty uniform. Kira splinted it with 2 pieces of structural tubing and a roll of medical tape from the kit, then dragged him out of the netting and into the aisle. The third was a Reichkai juvenile, young, small, with fur that was lighter than the adults, almost cream-colored. The juvenile was breathing but not responsive, a deep laceration across its ribcage. Kira packed the wound with hemostatic gauze, applied pressure, and taped it down. The juvenile's mother, the female from the third row, the one who had been saying please, was standing over them both, her clawed hands opening and closing, her amber eyes fixed on Kira's hands. "Your child is alive," Kira said. "I'm going to keep your child alive." The implant translated. The mother made a sound that was not a word in any language. Kira got them out of the wreck. It took 40 minutes. The Reshkai were not small. They averaged 2 meters tall and massed close to 120 kilos, with dense bone structure and the thick musculature of a species evolved for a heavy-gravity forest world. Getting them through the inverted fuselage, through hatches that were now in the ceiling, through gaps in the hull where the metal had peeled back like torn foil, was physical work that left Kira's arms shaking and her uniform soaked through with sweat. She established a perimeter. That was the training, talking 12 years in Earth's Interstellar Disaster Response Corps, specializing in hostile environment survival. She had kept people alive on a space station with a cracked reactor core. She had kept people alive on a moon where the atmosphere turned to acid rain every 16 hours. She had kept people alive in a cargo hold drifting in deep space for 9 days with no power and no heat. This was what she did. This was the only thing she had ever been good at. The world they had crashed on was catalogued as VKR 4471 in the Galactic Union's navigational database. The Reshkai called it the Burning Ground. It was a volcanic hellscape, technically habitable, meaning the atmosphere was breathable and the surface temperature was within survivable range, but only in the sense that a furnace room is survivable if you don't stay too long. The air was thick with particulate. The ground was a patchwork of black volcanic rock, steaming fissures, and patches of alien vegetation that grew in dense, fibrous mats over the warmer vents. The sky was the color of old rust, choked with ash and the glow of a sun that never quite broke through the haze. The temperature at the crash site was 41 degrees Celsius. It would climb to 48 by midday, the transport's surviving instruments told her, and drop to 32 at night. Water was present in the form of mineral-laden springs, but untreated it would shred human kidneys in a week and do worse to the Reshkai's more sensitive renal system. Food was non-existent outside the transport's emergency rations, which had been packed for a crew of 4 on a 12-hour transit, not for 19 survivors on an indefinite stay. The distress beacon was dead. The crash had sheared the antenna array clean off the transport's spine. Kira found it 200 meters uphill, tangled in the fibrous vegetation, bent into a shape that no amount of field repair would straighten. She carried it back anyway, stripped it down, salvaged the transmitter module, the power coupling, and 30 meters of antenna wire. Built a jury-rigged beacon from the transmitter module, a battery pack from the transport's emergency lighting system, and the antenna wire strung between 2 pieces of volcanic rock wedged into the ground. It was not a strong signal. It was barely a signal at all, a low-power pulse on the universal distress frequency, repeating every 8 seconds, reaching maybe 4 light minutes on a good transmission before the atmospheric particulate chewed it to noise. Any ship in orbit would hear it. Any ship within the system would probably hear it. But VKR 4471 was not in a system that anyone visited. It was a waypoint, a navigational reference marker on the route between the Reshkai colony worlds and the transit hub at Gallies Von. Ships passed through the system's outer boundary without slowing down. The odds of anyone being close enough to hear a 4 light-minute signal were the kind of odds that survival specialists learn not to calculate, because the numbers were never encouraging. Kira calculated them anyway. She had always been better with honesty than hope. The odds were poor. She told the Reshkai nothing about the odds. She told them that the beacon was transmitting, that a signal had been sent, and that what they needed to do now was survive until someone heard it. She said this with the flat, calm certainty that she had learned to project in 12 years of keeping people alive in places that wanted them dead, the voice that said, "I have done this before, and I will do it again, and the only thing you need to do is what I tell you." The Rishkai watched her with their amber eyes and did not argue. Day 1. Kira inventoried the supplies. 48 emergency ration packs, each designed for one human for one day, heavy on protein and carbohydrates, light on everything else. The Rishkai were obligate herbivores with a metabolism that ran roughly 60% faster than a human's. She did the math. At half rations for the Rishkai and quarter rations for herself, the food would last 5 days. She needed it to last longer than that. She found the answer in the vegetation. The fibrous mats that grew over the thermal vents were not edible in any conventional sense. They were dense, woody, and tasted like burned rubber when she tried a small piece and spent 10 minutes spitting. But the younger growth at the edges of the mats, where new shoots were pushing through the volcanic rock, had a different texture. Softer, almost pulpy. She ran it through the transport's chemical analyzer, one of the few instruments that had survived the crash, and found it was cellulose-heavy, mineral-rich, and free of anything immediately toxic to either human or Rishkai biology. It was not food, but it was not poison, and it could be chewed and swallowed and processed by a digestive system, and that was enough. The Rishkai elder, a female named Tashin, the senior surviving member of the refugee group, watched Kira chew the first piece and waited. Kira chewed, swallowed, waited 30 minutes, did not vomit, did not cramp, did not develop a rash or a fever or blurred vision. She offered a piece to Tashin. "It is not pleasant," Kira said. The implant translated. Tashin's long ears twitched, the Rishkai equivalent of a wry smile. Kira had learned, and she took the piece and ate it. The sound of a Rishkai chewing was surprisingly loud, like gravel in a leather bag. "No," Tashin agreed, "it is not." Day 2. The injured juvenile, his name was Kithra, and he was 8 years old in Rishkai reckoning, roughly equivalent to a human 12-year-old, developed a fever. The laceration across his ribcage was infected. Kira had packed it with hemostatic gauze, which stopped the bleeding but was not an antibacterial, and the alien microbes in VKR 4471's atmosphere had found the wound before she could seal it properly. She had antibiotics in the emergency kit, human antibiotics. Designed for human biology, tested on human immune systems, calibrated for human body mass. She had no idea what they would do to a Rishkai juvenile. The medical database in the transport's computer was offline, the crash had destroyed the primary data core and the backup was corrupted. Lieutenant Price, who was the medical officer and who might have known the answer, was conscious now but feverish himself, drifting in and out of coherence, his broken leg swelling despite the splint. Kira looked at Kithra. The juvenile was shivering despite the 40-degree heat, his cream-colored fur matted with sweat, his amber eyes glassy. His mother, Rishia, the one who had been saying please on the transport, was pressed against his side, her body curved around his, her clawed hand stroking his fur with a repetitive, rhythmic motion that Kira recognized as a universal gesture. Every species she had ever worked with did it. The slow stroke, the desperate, futile attempt to keep someone alive through touch alone. Kira made the decision. She cut the antibiotic dose to 1/4 of the standard human dose, adjusted for Kithra's body mass, and administered it via intramuscular injection in the juvenile's thigh. Then she sat beside him for 6 hours, monitoring his breathing, his temperature, his pulse rate, counting the beats against the seconds on her chrono, because the medical scanner was dead, and her hands and her watch were the only instruments she had left. The fever broke at dawn on day 3. Kithra opened his eyes, looked at Kira, and said a word that the implant rendered as safekeeper. Kira did not know the precise meaning. The way Rishia's eyes widened, the way her clawed hands stopped their stroking and pressed flat against her own chest, told Kira it was not a small word. Day 3. The thermal vents shifted. Kira had been monitoring the ground temperature with the transport's remaining sensors, and at midday the readings spiked. The volcanic activity beneath the crash site was increasing. 2 new fissures opened 60 meters north of the wreck, venting superheated steam, and a gas that the chemical analyzer identified as hydrogen sulfide, toxic at the concentrations being produced, lethal with sustained exposure. She moved the camp. All 19 survivors, plus every piece of salvageable equipment, relocated 400 meters south to a shelf of cooled basalt at the edge of a shallow depression that offered a natural windbreak. The move took 5 hours. Kira carried Lieutenant Price on her back. 3 of the Reshkai, an elder male with a dislocated shoulder, a female with second-degree burns across her forearms, and Kithra, who was recovering but still too weak to walk the full distance, were carried by the other Reshkai adults on improvised stretchers made from hull plating and cargo straps. No one was left at the old site. Not one piece of equipment, not one survivor. Kira checked 3 times. She walked the perimeter of the abandoned wreck, checked every compartment, checked the cargo hold, checked the spaces between the hull plates where a small Reshkai juvenile might have crawled to hide. Empty. Everyone accounted for. She rebuilt the beacon at the new site, strung the antenna wire between 2 basalt pillars, checked the transmission. The signal was weaker, the battery pack was degrading in the heat, and the atmospheric particulate was getting denser as the volcanic activity increased. She estimated the effective range had dropped to 2 light minutes, maybe less. The Reshkai elder Tashin approached her that evening while Kira was rationing the remaining emergency packs. 3 days in, and the packs were more than half gone. The vegetation supplement was keeping bellies from being entirely empty, but the Reshkai were losing weight visibly, their fur hung looser on their frames, and the cubs moved with a lethargy that had nothing to do with the heat. "How long?" Tashin asked. Kira looked at her. Tashin's amber eyes were steady. She was old, her fur had gone to silver at the muzzle and the tips of her ears, and her claws were yellowed and blunt with age. She had been the leader of this refugee group since before they left Reshkai Prime, which was now occupied territory, a world conquered by the Vithrani Dominion 6 months ago. Its forests burned, its cities razed, its population scattered to a dozen refugee convoys crawling through deep space toward any world that would take them. This convoy, the Reshkai word translated roughly as the last walking, had been the smallest. 43 refugees aboard a converted cargo hauler, escorted by a Galactic Union humanitarian transport that was supposed to take them from the transit hub at Galizvan to a resettlement camp on a Union-administered world. The transport had been diverted to avoid a debris field, had hit an uncharted gravitational anomaly, had lost navigational lock, and had dropped out of transit space into VKR 4471's atmosphere at an angle and velocity that turned a routine course correction into a catastrophe. "How long until they come?" Tashin asked again, because Kira had not answered. "I don't know," Kira said. "The beacon is transmitting, someone will hear it. The Galactic Union will hear it. Someone will hear it." Tashin studied her. The Reshkai did not blink the way humans did, their eyelids moved laterally, a slow sweep across the amber iris that looked like consideration. "You did not answer my question, survival specialist." "No," Kira said. "I didn't. Because the answer is that you do not know if anyone is listening." Kira met her eyes. "The answer is that it doesn't matter. Whether someone comes in 2 days or 20, the job is the same. Keep everyone alive. Keep the water treated. Keep the shelter maintained. Keep the beacon transmitting. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm going to keep doing. And if no one comes, then I keep doing it longer." Tashin made the ear twitch again, the wry smile. Then she turned and walked back to where the other Reshkai were huddled in the shelter of the basalt windbreak, and Kira heard her speaking to them in the low, rolling cadence of formal Reshkai, the register used for reassurance, for authority, for the declaration of fact. Kira did not ask the implant to translate. She did not need to. The tone was the same in every language. Day 4. The water purification system failed. The transport's emergency water recycler, a compact, rugged unit designed to process up to 50 liters per day of contaminated water into something drinkable, had been running continuously since the crash. The mineral content of VKR 4471 spring water was extreme dissolved iron, manganese, arsenic, and a compound the analyzer called vanadate that Kira had never heard of, and that the system classified as a renal toxin for both human and Reishkai physiology. The recycler's filter membrane, designed for a maximum service life of 30 days under normal conditions, had been shredding itself against the mineral load and finally gave out. Kira rebuilt it. She cut a section of cargo netting, a fine mesh polymer designed to contain zero-gravity freight, and layered it with activated carbon from the transport's air filtration system, and a stratum of crushed volcanic rock that she ground by hand, smashing fist-sized pieces of basalt with a structural wrench, until the fragments were fine enough to serve as a mineral trap. The improvised filter did not produce water that tasted like anything a human or Reishkai would choose to drink. It tasted like warm metal and dust, but the analyzer confirmed it was below the toxicity threshold for both species, and that was the only metric that mattered. 19 survivors drank water that tasted like the inside of a machine, and no one complained, because complaining required energy that no one had. Day 5. The wind changed. A thermal inversion layer settled over the crash region, trapping the volcanic gases close to the ground. The hydrogen sulfide concentration at the campsite rose from trace levels to 15 parts per million, not immediately lethal, but enough to cause headaches, nausea, and eye irritation. The Reishkai, with their larger lung capacity and more efficient respiratory systems, were less affected than Kira and Price, but the cubs were struggling. Their smaller bodies processed the gas less efficiently, and by midday 3 of the 5 Reishkai juveniles were vomiting. Kira improvised respirators. She cut strips from the transport's cabin air filters, the ones that hadn't been crushed in the crash, and fashioned them into face coverings that could be tied behind the head. For the Reishkai, whose facial structure was broader and flatter than a human's, she modified the design with extra material and cargo straps for a better seal around their wide nostrils. The respirators were ugly. They looked like something from a field hospital in a war that history had forgotten. But they worked. The vomiting stopped. The headaches eased. Kira made 2019 for the survivors, one for herself, and checked each one personally, adjusting the fit, testing the seal, making sure no one was breathing unfiltered air. Lieutenant Price watched her from his stretcher while she worked. His leg was healing slowly, imperfectly, without proper orthopedic care, but his mind was clearer now, and he had been watching Kira with the expression of a man assembling a picture from fragments. "Vasek," he said, "when was the last time you slept?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Kira tied the last respirator strap on a Reishkai cub, a small female who flinched at the touch and then, after a moment, leaned into Kira's hand the way a child leans into a parent's palm. The gesture made something shift behind Kira's sternum. She ignored it. "I sleep when the camp is secure." "The camp is never secure, that's the problem." "Then I'll sleep when we're off this rock." Day 6, Day 7, Day 8. The days blurred into a rhythm that Kira imposed on the camp through sheer force of will. Wake at dawn. Water distribution. Ration distribution. Equipment check, beacon, water system, medical supplies, shelter integrity. Injury assessment, Price's leg, Keithra's wound site, the elder male's shoulder, the female's burns, the low-grade respiratory irritation that was developing in several of the adult Reishkai. Vegetation harvest. Water collection from the nearest spring, 200 meters east. Filter and treat, distribute again, check the beacon, check it again. Every morning Kira walked the perimeter. Every morning she checked the beacon's transmission log and found the same thing. Signal transmitting, no response received. Every morning she looked at the rust-colored sky and saw nothing but ash and haze, and the dim glow of a sun that seemed farther away than it should. On day 8, Tashin found her at the beacon, staring at the transmission log. "You are afraid," Tashin said. "I'm not afraid. You are afraid that no one is listening, that the signal goes out and reaches nothing but empty space, that we will die here, all of us, one by one, and the signal will keep transmitting after we are gone, and no one will ever hear it." Kira's jaw tightened. "We are not going to die here." "You say that with great conviction." "I say it because it's true. I have 19 people alive on this rock, and I intend to keep it that way. Every single one. I am not going to lose anyone on this world. That is not something I'm willing to do. The universe does not negotiate with will." "Then the universe hasn't met me." Tashin studied her for a long time, the lateral blink, the slow sweep of amber. Then the elder reached out and placed one clawed hand on Kira's shoulder, a gesture that, among the Reshkai, was reserved for one's own bloodline. Kira did not know that then. She learned it later, and the knowledge stayed with her for a very long time. Day 9, the worst day. The ground shook at midday, not a tremor, not the gentle vibration of a thermal vent adjusting, but a full seismic event that lasted 14 seconds and opened a fissure 20 meters from the campsite. Superheated gas vented from the fissure in a column that rose 40 meters into the air, and the temperature at the camp jumped 9 degrees in 30 minutes. They moved again. Kira led the column south and west, away from the volcanic zone, carrying Price, dragging the beacon components, shepherding 19 exhausted, underfed, frightened survivors across a landscape of black rock and steaming vents. The Rishkai walked in single file, the adults carrying the cubs, the injured supported between walking partners. Tashin walked at the rear, counting heads, making sure no one fell behind. 2 kilometers, it took 4 hours. The new campsite was a natural alcove in a basalt cliff, a shallow cave, open at the front, with a rock overhang that would provide shade from the direct heat and a slight natural draft that kept the air moving. It was better than the previous site. It was still a furnace. Kira rebuilt the beacon a 3rd time. The battery pack was dying, the heat was destroying the lithium cells faster than she could compensate, and the output voltage was dropping with every cycle. She wired in a second battery scavenged from the transport's emergency lighting, ran the calculations, and estimated the beacon had another 6 to 8 days of transmission capacity before it went silent permanently. 6 to 8 days, and then nothing. She did not tell anyone. Day 10. Kira rationed the last emergency packs. They were gone by evening. From this point forward, the only food was the vegetation, the pulpy shoots from the thermal vent mats, supplemented with a gritty, mineral-heavy moss that grew on the shaded sides of the basalt formations, and that the Reshkai found marginally more palatable than the shoots. She lost weight. Everyone lost weight. The Reshkai adults moved more slowly. The cubs slept more. Price, whose body was burning calories to repair a compound fracture, was gaunt and gray, and his hands trembled when he tried to hold a water container. Kira did not lose anyone. Not one. Every morning she counted 19, and every morning 19 counted back. Day 11, late afternoon, the sky changed. Kira was at the water spring, filtering the day's collection through the improvised system, when she heard it. Not with her ears, the atmospheric particulate and the volcanic background noise swallowed most external sounds. She heard it with her bones. A low, subsonic vibration that climbed through the basalt beneath her feet and traveled up her spine and settled in her chest like a second heartbeat. She looked up. The rust-colored sky was splitting. Something was coming through the ash layer, something bright, something that pushed the haze aside with the casual authority of a thing that belonged to an entirely different category than anything VKR 4471 had ever produced. The light was blue-white, clean. It cut through the volcanic murk the way a surgical lamp cuts through gauze, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew until Kira could see the shape behind it. A ship, not a ship, a constellation. The blue-white light resolved into 5 distinct points, then 7, then 12, each one a vessel descending through the atmosphere in a formation so precise it looked rehearsed. The lead ship was enormous, a carrier-class hull with the angular profile of Earth's deep space fleet, its running lights blazing, its hull reflecting the clean blue-white of its own approach lighting against the dirty rust of VKR 4471's sky. Behind it, flanking it, spread in a pattern that covered the horizon from edge to edge, were support ships, transports, medical frigates, cargo haulers with open bay doors, already deploying atmospheric processors that trailed white condensation plumes through the filthy air. And in the center of the formation, descending on a column of thrust that turned the volcanic rock beneath it to glass, was a hospital ship. Kira knew the silhouette, the UESS Covenant, a dedicated medical platform capable of treating 400 casualties simultaneously across 11 species' biological requirements. It was the largest hospital ship in Earth's interstellar fleet. It had no weapons. It carried 1,200 medical personnel, a full surgical suite, a xenobiology lab, and enough pharmaceutical stock to supply a mid-sized colony for a year. They had sent it for 19 survivors on a volcanic rock. Kira stood at the water spring with a filtration container in her hands and watched the fleet descend. And for the first time in 11 days, she could not make her hands stop shaking. The Rishkai emerged from the cave. Tashin first, then the adults, then the cubs, then Rishia carrying Kithra on her hip. They stood on the basalt ledge and watched the ships come down through the ash, and the sound they made was not a word. It was the low, resonant hum that the Rishkai produced in the deepest register of their vocal range, a sound that Kira's implant struggled with, cycling through possible translations and discarding each one because none of them were adequate. Awe, disbelief, the recognition of something so far beyond expectation that language failed. The lead transport touched down 300 meters from the campsite, and before the landing gear had finished cycling, the forward ramp was lowering. Medical personnel came down the ramp at a run, human medics and nurses in white and blue uniforms, carrying field kits, pulling grav stretchers, moving with the organized urgency of people who had drilled this exact scenario 1,000 times, and were now executing it at speed because speed was the difference between alive and not. A woman in a commander's uniform walked down the ramp behind them. She was short, compact, gray-haired, and she moved with the economy of someone who had done this many times and did not waste motion. She crossed the volcanic rock toward the campsite with a datapad in one hand, scanning the survivors, counting heads, assessing injuries with the practiced eye of a field commander who could triage from 50 meters. She stopped in front of Kira. Chief Warrant Officer Kira Vasek. Yes, ma'am. Commander Lynn Ockhaffer, UESS Covenant. We received your beacon pulse at 0317 shipboard yesterday, relayed through a monitoring buoy on the system's outer boundary. The buoy was placed by a geological survey team 2 years ago. It was not designed to receive distress signals, it was monitoring seismic activity in the inner system. A pause. Your signal was so weak the buoy almost classified it as background noise. A technician on the survey team's home station noticed the periodicity and flagged it for review. How many ships? Kira's voice was not steady. She did not try to make it steady. 11 days of keeping 19 people alive on a world that wanted them dead had used up whatever reserves she had allocated for steadiness. 12. The Covenant, 4 medical transports, 3 cargo haulers with atmospheric processing equipment, 2 escort frigates, and 2 search and rescue cutters. Akafor looked past Kira to the campsite, the basalt alcove, the improvised shelter, the jury-rigged water filtration system, the antenna wire strung between two rocks, the 20 respirators hanging from a line of cargo strap. You kept them alive for 11 days with this. I kept them alive. All of them. One was killed in the crash. One was dead before I could reach him. 19 survivors. All 19 are here. Akafor looked at her. The look was one that Kira had never received before, not pity, not admiration, not the hollow gratitude of a superior officer filling out a commendation form. It was recognition. The look of one professional seeing another professional's work and understanding, at a level below words, exactly what it had cost. We brought the atmospheric processors because the planetary survey data indicated the air quality here would be dangerous for prolonged exposure, Akafor said. I see you solved that with cabin air filters and cargo straps. It worked. I see you rebuilt the water purification system with cargo netting and crushed rock. It worked. I see you treated a compound fracture, an alien juvenile's infected laceration, and respiratory distress across 5 juvenile subjects with a standard 4-person emergency kit. It worked. Akafor's mouth did something that was not quite a smile. Chief Warrant Officer Vasek, I have been running disaster response for 22 years. I have seen field improvisation on 37 worlds. What you did here with what you had is going to be in the training manual. I don't care about the training manual, Kira said. I care that 19 people are going on that ship. They are. Right now. The medical teams were already working. Grav stretchers glided across the volcanic rock toward the campsite. A medic knelt beside Lieutenant Price, scanned his leg, administered an analgesic that made him gasp, and then relax for the first time in 11 days. Another team surrounded Kithra, running scanners over the juvenile's wound site, speaking in the calm, technical cadence of professionals who had treated 100 species and knew exactly what they were looking at. The Reshkai did not resist the medics. They did not flinch from the scanners. They walked onto the grav stretchers or rose from the ground and moved toward the transport ramp with the quiet, exhausted trust of people who had been held together by one person's refusal to let them fall apart, and who could finally, after 11 days, allow themselves to stop being brave. Rashia carried Kithra to the ramp. At the base of the ramp she stopped. She turned. She looked at Kira, who was standing at the edge of the campsite with Commander Akafor, watching the evacuation proceed. Rashia said something. A single word. The implant processed it, cycled through its database, and returned a translation that was technically accurate and emotionally inadequate, the way all translations are when a word carries the weight of 11 days and a child's life. The word meant, the one who would not let us go. Kira heard the translation. She did not respond. She stood on the black volcanic rock of a world called the Burning Ground and watched 19 survivors walk up a ramp into a ship that had come 1,200 light years because a weak, dying signal had pulsed from a rock that nobody visited, and a technician had noticed a pattern in the noise, and Earth had sent not a shuttle, not a cutter, not a single transport, but a hospital ship and a fleet. Tashin was the last to board. The elder walked to the base of the ramp, paused and looked back at the campsite, the alcove, the antenna wire, the water filter, the respirator line. The remains of 11 days of survival that had been held together by structural wrench and cargo straps, and one human's absolute refusal to count anyone as lost. Then Tashin looked at Kira, the lateral blink, the slow sweep of amber. I told them, Tashin said, last night, when you were at the beacon, I told them what I believe. What do you believe? That the universe sent us to a world that kills everything, and then it sent us you. Tashin's ears twitched, the wry smile. I believe the universe is not very consistent. Kira almost laughed. It came out as something rougher than a laugh, a sound that had 11 days of sleeplessness and fear and iron discipline behind it, a sound that cracked at the edges. "Go up the ramp, Tashin. Come with me. I'm right behind you." The elder turned and walked up the ramp. Her silver-brown fur caught the blue-white light of the ship's interior, and for a moment she looked like something from a world that had forests and dim light and cool air, the world she had lost, the world that had been burned, the world that the Reshkai would never return to. Then the ramp's interior lighting took over, and she was just an old woman walking into a clean, safe, warm place for the first time in months. Kira did not go up the ramp immediately. She walked back to the campsite. She checked the beacon still transmitting, the battery pack wheezing out its last milliwatts. She turned it off. She coiled the antenna wire neatly, the way she had been trained to recover equipment in the field. She folded the respirators. She drained the water filter. She left the camp clean. Commander Akafor was waiting at the base of the ramp when Kira returned. "The Reshkai leader Tashin asked me to tell you something," Akafor said. "She said the word safekeeper is not a casual title. She said the last person the Reshkai named as safekeeper was the one who led them out of the burning forests of Reshkai Prime when the Dominion came. She said that person died on the march." Kira looked at the ramp. The interior was visible: white walls, clean air, the hum of systems that worked because they were designed to work and maintained by people who maintained them, and powered by reactors that did not need to be coaxed and improvised and held together with tape. "She said you are the second," Akafor added. "I did my job." "Yes, you did." Akafor paused. "The survey team's monitoring buoy, the one that caught your signal, it was scheduled for decommission next month. If your transport had crashed 4 weeks later, the buoy would have been dark. No one would have heard you. Then it's a good thing we crashed when we did." "Is that how you're going to frame it?" "That's how I'm going to frame it, Commander. Because the alternative is thinking about what would have happened if the buoy was already dark, and I don't have the energy for that thought. Not today." Akafor nodded. She stepped aside. Kira walked up the ramp. The interior of the transport was warm and clean and smelled like recycled air and medical antiseptic. The most beautiful smell Kira had ever encountered, because it meant systems and people, and a ship that could leave this rock and go somewhere that was not trying to kill everyone on it. The Reshkai were being settled into passenger compartments that had been configured for their species' wider seats. The ambient temperature dropped to 30 degrees to match their preferred range. The lighting dimmed to the amber wavelength their eyes were built for. Kithra was on a proper medical stretcher, already connected to a diagnostic suite that was cataloging his vital signs in real time. His wound was being cleaned and dressed by a xenobiologist who handled the Reshkai juvenile's fur with a gentleness that made Rishia's clawed hands press flat against her chest again. Price was in the surgical bay. His leg was being properly set, the field splint removed, the bone aligned, a regenerative cast applied that would have the fracture healed in 3 weeks. He looked up as Kira passed the bay's open door. "Vasek." She stopped. "You didn't sleep for 11 days. "I slept." "You slept 4 hours total. I was conscious enough to count." "It was enough." "It was not enough. It was insane." "You're going to sleep now." "After I file the report." "You're going to sleep now, Vasek. That's a medical order." Kira looked at him. The gaunt face, the trembling hands, the eyes that were clear now, clear and steady and carrying the same look that Akafor had given her, the recognition, the understanding, the knowledge of what it costs to hold 19 lives in your hands for 11 days on a world that offers nothing but ways to die. "Yeah," she said, "okay." She found an empty seat in the passenger compartment. She sat down. The seat was designed for a Reshkai and was too wide for her, but the cushioning was soft and the air was clean, and the vibration of the ship's engines coming to full power was the most reassuring sound she had heard in 11 days. Through the viewport, she could see the fleet. The Covenant hung in the rust-colored sky like a promise, massive, white-hulled red crosses blazing on its flanks, its shuttle bays open, and deploying additional medical teams to the surface to run environmental assessment. The escort frigates circled in a wide patrol pattern, their sensor arrays sweeping the system, not because there was a threat, but because Earth did not send a hospital ship anywhere without making sure the hospital ship was safe. The atmospheric processors were already working. The air outside the transport was clearing, the volcanic haze thinning, the first patch of actual sky visible through the ash for the first time since Kira had arrived on this world. Tashin sat down beside her. The elder's clawed hand rested on the armrest between them, not touching Kira, but close, present. "The convoy we were part of," Tashin said quietly. "The last walking. 43 of us left Rishkai Prime. 7 died on the cargo hauler before we reached Galleys Von. 5 died of illness on the station while we waited for the transport. 4 died in the crash. And then there were 26, and then there were 19. And for 11 days on a world that burns everything, that number did not change." It wasn't going to change. No, it was not, because you would not allow it. Tashin's ears were flat, not with fear this time, but with something else. Something that the Rishkai expressed with their bodies when their words were not large enough. Among our people, there is a teaching that the measure of a soul is not what it builds when the world is kind. It is what it holds when the world is fire. Kira said nothing. Her eyes were closing. 11 days of 4 hours sleep catching up with her all at once, pulling her down into the soft seat and the clean air and the hum of engines that were carrying them away from the burning ground. "You held 19 souls in the fire," Tashin said, "and the fire did not take a single one." Kira's breathing slowed. Her hands, which had not stopped shaking since the fleet broke through the sky, finally went still in her lap. She slept. The UESS Covenant processed all 19 survivors within 48 hours. Kithra's infection was cleared. Price's fracture was set and healing. The Rishkai adult's respiratory irritation was treated with a targeted bronchodilator that the xenobiology team synthesized on board. The cubs gained weight. The elder male's dislocated shoulder was properly reduced and immobilized. The female's burns were treated with a regenerative dressing that would leave no scarring. Tashin filed a formal petition with the Galactic Union Refugee Authority, not for resettlement, not for transit to the original destination. She petitioned for protected residency on an Earth-administered world, on the grounds that humanity had demonstrated a duty of care that no other species in the Union had matched or attempted to match. The petition cited the fleet, 12 ships for 19 refugees, a hospital ship for a crew of 4, and a group of refugees that no one else in the galaxy had bothered to look for. Atmospheric processors deployed to clean the air of a planet that was not Earth's territory, not Earth's problem, not Earth's concern. A monitoring buoy that a human survey team had placed in a system that nobody visited, which had caught a signal that nobody was listening for, which had triggered a response that nobody had asked for. The petition was approved in 9 days. The Rishkai of the last walking were granted residency on Avalon Station, an Earth-administered habitat in the Tau Ceti system. 43 had left Rishkai Prime. 19 arrived on Avalon Station. Every one of those 19 arrived alive, and every one of them arrived because a chief warrant officer named Kira Vasek had decided, on a volcanic rock at the edge of known space, that the number was not going to change. Kira filed her after-action report from the Covenant's officers' quarters. It was 9 pages long, and it read like a maintenance log: equipment used, procedures followed, decisions made, outcomes achieved. It did not mention fear. It did not mention the shaking hands. It did not mention the nights when the beacon pulsed and nothing answered, and the dark pressed in, and Kira sat with her back to the basalt wall, watching 19 shapes breathe in the dim light of VKR 4471's rust-colored night, counting them again, because if she could count them, they were still alive, and if they were still alive, she had not failed yet. The report's final line was a single sentence. All 19 subjects recovered and transferred to definitive care. No further action required. The Covenant's captain read the report, signed it, and forwarded it to Fleet Command with a cover note that said, "Recommend Chief Warrant Officer Vasek for the Distinguished Service Cross." Her after-action report understates the situation by approximately 9 pages. Kira did not receive the recommendation for 3 weeks because she slept for most of the transit to Avalon Station. When she woke, Tashin was sitting in the corridor outside her quarters, waiting. The elder had a container of water, clean, cool, mineral-free water that tasted like nothing at all, which was the best taste Kira had ever experienced. "You should know," Tashin said, handing her the water, "that the word safekeeper is permanent. It does not expire. It does not require renewal. It is not a title given by authority. It is a title given by the kept." Kira drank the water. It was clean and cold, and it did not taste like metal or dust or the inside of a machine. Tashin, "Yes. I would have stayed on that rock until every one of you was off it. If the fleet had come in 20 days or 30 or 50, I would have stayed." "I know," the elder said. "That is why the word was given." The Covenant docked at Avalon Station on day 23. 19 Rishkai walked off the medical ship and into a habitat where the air was clean and the water was pure, and the temperature was what their bodies were built for. They were met by a resettlement team, a housing coordinator, a cultural liaison, and a xenobiologist who would monitor their recovery for the next 6 months. Kira watched from the observation deck. She did not go down to the dock. She had filed her report, completed her debrief, submitted to the medical evaluation that confirmed she was dehydrated, malnourished, sleep-deprived, and carrying enough accumulated radiation exposure to put her on restricted duty for the next 90 days. She watched the Rishkai walk into their new home, Tashin at the front, Rishia and Kithra behind her. The cubs, moving faster now, their fur glossy with returning health, their amber eyes wide with the light of a station that was not on fire. From the observation deck, Kira could see the Covenant's hull through the station's panoramic windows, white and massive and steady, its red crosses glowing in the station's exterior lighting. 12 ships had been sent, a hospital ship for 19 survivors, atmospheric processors for a planet that nobody owned, a fleet for a group of refugees that the galaxy had already written off. That was the job. That was always the job. You answered the call, you sent what was needed and then more than what was needed, and you did not leave until everyone was off the rock. Kira Vasek stood at the window and watched the last of the Rishkai disappear into the station's interior, and her hands were steady, and her count was 19, and the number had not changed.